Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lieutenant Stephen Rogers, and welcome to Tonight in North America. Boy, do we have a great show for you tonight. My good friend and a true patriot of Canada and of the free world, I would add, Shadow Davis will be with us shortly. But folks, I want to share a few things with you before I ask Shadow to join us. To begin with, Happy Mother's Day. Mother's Day is Sunday, and I want to wish all those great mothers who are here on earth, as well as those in the heavenly realm with the Lord. I want to wish them a happy Mother's Day. And my message to the woke community, we know what that's all about, right, folks? With all those liberals and Democrats and everyone who wants to do away with Mother's Day, well, you can be sure that through the electoral process, and I always say within the framework of the law, we the people will be doing away with you before we do away with Mother's Day. That's just not going to happen in the United States of America, and I'm sure not going to happen in Canada. Folks, a couple of things. One, I've been getting a lot of requests to give you an update on the SOS letters, and by all means, here's the update. We have been so overwhelmed with letters from Canada. Remember, this started last week, and by the way, from the United States. This started last week, and as of today, we're going past 6,000 letters. 6,000 folks. We have people making trips to the post office twice a day. And every time they come back from the post office, we got very large crates of mail. So each one of those letters are being counted. And then they're being put in a big bin right now. In fact, we're going to be renting a storage facility to put them in. And then when we see it start to trickle down, look, it may take a month or so. I don't know. But I want to get as many as we could. And there are going to be two things we're going to do with them. Number one, we're going to hold a press conference, and we're going to have these letters with us. What we want to do is let the press come, let them see for themselves. It's one thing that I could say, Shadow can say, any of us could say, well, the Canadian people are seeking some sort of help with regard to what is going on in their country. And the least they can do is heighten the awareness of their neighbor, the United States of America. So we're going to invite the press at some point to come to take their pictures, to do their interviews, and we're going to share with them, look, see for yourself. It's not just us saying this. There are tens of thousands of Canadians and Americans who support them who are telling you we have a national security problem on the border. And so that's number one. Number two, once the press gets a hold of it, of course, politicians usually like to get pictures taken with things that they thought are worthwhile, but pretty much primarily to their own political survival, but that's okay. I don't care why they come. I don't care how they come, but as long as they come. And then once they come, believe me, there are some political leaders in this country who we've already spoken to that want to be made well aware of what's going on in Canada. And hopefully, they're going to let the Canadian Parliament know. Now, I want to put a couple of things to rest, folks. I see a lot of misinformation on the internet, as you do, especially with regard to what we're doing here. There will be no U.S. military intervention in Canada. Please put that out of your mind. That's the last thing on earth you want to do. No one in this country is going to interfere, all right? Interfere with the legislative process in Canada, in any country. Why? It's against the law. We cannot get involved in that kind of stuff. But what we can do is call upon our Congress to take the necessary measures that they know they can take to get a clear message across to any country on this planet. We've done that with every country that has leaned towards a communist agenda. And believe me, with enough proof, and we think we have it, enough evidence, we think we have it, enough pressure from the American people and the Canadian people, I believe our Congress will get that message across to the Canadian government. And I've said it once, I'll say it twice, I'll say it over and over again. The Canadian people are smart. They're going to take care of business. Through the electoral process, within the framework of the law, the Canadian people are going to take care of business. And I'll tell you one thing, folks, no matter how busy we get here, and boy, do we have problems, and we'll be talking to Shadow about some of these problems tonight, we are not going to keep our eyes off of what's going on in Canada. It's not going to happen. We did it too long. Well, it's not going to happen. And I can tell you, American people are being made well aware of what's going on in your country, and we're going to do everything we could to help you. All right, folks, so let's get my buddy here on, Shadow Davis. Shadow, welcome aboard.
Very good to be here, sir. Thank you for having me on again. It's been a long time.
Well, it was quite a pleasure being on your broadcast. I had a great time doing it, and we got a lot to talk about. In fact, I was going to have an American guest on tonight. I told him he could take the night off because I'm going to have you the whole hour. How's that?
That sounds good to me.
Okay, that's what we'll do. Well, first thing I want to talk to you about is something, excuse me, that you said on your show. And it kind of resonated with me here in America. You talked about unity, specifically in relation to the what I call the 21st century Iron Curtain, Berlin Wall, if you will, that electronic invisible wall that Trudeau put up, better known as C11. You talked about all the broadcasters, all the journalists, all of those individuals who are live streaming got to come together as one strong voice. Can you share with our audience tonight, as well as the Americans who are listening, what you mean when you say we need to come together and take care of this problem?
Well, we have, it's unlike the United States of America, LT. You guys at least have a couple of live cable stations, news stations that will give news right down the middle or slightly right leaning. Here in Canada, we have nothing like that. We have three news networks, three national news networks. One of them is owned and operated by the government of Canada. That's called the CBC. And then there's one called Global News, which receives funding from the federal government. And then there's CTV, which is run by an organization called Bell Media. And I'm not sure, I can't say for certain, but I do believe if they don't receive funding from the federal government, they definitely do receive other favors in terms of licensing through our version of the FCC, which is called the CRTC. None of these on air news entities broadcast down the middle coverage. They broadcast left leaning, sometimes extreme left leaning versions of the news. So, in essence, it's like what Tucker Carlson said the other night. He said, these people are telling you the truth for the most part, but they leave out certain things that will make the story not fit the narrative that they want Canadians to hear. And so that is, in essence, lying by omission. And so what we're trying to do, the online presence, all of the independent media in Canada, which is ironically mostly right-leaning, is trying to get out the different side of the story. And so we have one network called Rebel News, which is owned and operated by a fellow called Ezra Levant, who is already starting a campaign against the federal government's Bill C-11, which is now, by the way, law. It's no longer a bill, it's now a law that allows the CRTC, the Canadian Radio and Telecommunications Commission, which has sweeping powers for any broadcast entity in this country, radio, television, and now the internet, I suppose, to tell you what you can and can't do, what you can and can't say. And this is a breach of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, depending on how they enact the principles of Bill C-11. If they try to take us off the air completely, that would be a breach of freedom of speech, which would be a breach of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But I don't believe it's going to be that simple. I believe what they're going to do, instead of taking us off the air completely, is downrank the independent online entities in this country. So you won't be able to find us on any Google search or any other search engine until you go to page 32 or 33. And they also know that people don't do that. They haven't got the patience for that. If they do a search on something and you're not on page 1 or page 2, and page 2 is even going a long way, they're going to forget about you. And that's what they're hoping people will do. So what we need to do is, all of us, Rebel News, Western Standard News, TNC.news, this is a True North news organization, and all of the other independent broadcasters like myself, like Wayne Peters, and I know you've had Wayne on your show before from What's Up Canada. We've got a great new organization called CanadiansForTruth.ca based in Calgary with Jamie Soleil and Theo Fleury. They are two sports celebrities who have turned into slightly right-leaning news journalists, and they interview some interesting people. They hold town halls once every month. They're called Fire and Ice events. I'll be going to the Calgary one on May 25th as their guest. And this is what we need to do. We all need to band together, all of us together, in order to fight back and get the message out to people. Because if we do go to court, we're going to need some serious funding to fight the federal government of Canada. And they're going to try and drag out any kind of lawsuit for as long as they can. They'll throw 100 lawyers at us, and we need to be able to fight back. If we can't fight back, that will be the end of free speech in this country. And at that point, we're done.
You know, Shadow, what they are doing to us, we could do to them. And let me qualify that. I read a story where the Canadian Broadcasting Company, CBC, or who's ever up there running your broadcast, had a problem with Twitter. Apparently, they had a problem with Elon Musk, and they went away, and now they're begging to come back. But here's what I think we should do. Now, here's where Lieutenant Rogers gets into trouble. But I don't care. Okay, Imagine everybody watching. Now, listen, we get 1,000 letters a day now, and I can see where that's going. Imagine everyone going on Twitter, sending a message to Elon saying, please ban any Canadian broadcasting corporations from Twitter. Please ban Justin Trudeau from Twitter. I mean, we should just ask him to ban them. Why? Because they're doing exactly, Shadow, what Elon doesn't want done. They are censoring. They are censoring broadcasting. So I would say, Shadow, what do you think? I mean, could you imagine Elon waking up tomorrow with maybe 500,000 get rid of the Canadian Broadcasters Corporation on your platform, and Trudeau? What do you think of that?
Well, what's interesting is that, Elon has been labeling certain news organizations as government-funded entities, right? And so a couple of weeks ago, he listed the CBC as a government-funded entity on Twitter. And so the CBC, well, we're not going to stand for that. We're going to cease all activity on Twitter. We're not going to use Twitter anymore. And so, and they did say in their final tweet that we're less than 70% government funded. The rest of it comes from ad revenues and whatnot. And so then Elon, I think as a joke, probably relabeled them as 69% government funded, which was hilarious. But we've got another bill in Canada, which is called Bill C-18. Now, this bill, I think, is going to work in concert with the new law C-11, in that this will allow the news entities, the qualified news entities, and I'm not sure how that qualification process works. I guess it goes through the government, although nobody knows what tenets they're going to use to qualify.
You're talking about the Canadian government?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you can find those guidelines in the Chinese Communist Party manifesto.
Right. Well, that's true. I mean, they haven't come up with any here yet. I think they just borrow them from China. But what's going to happen is they're going to probably say, all right, so Global News, CBC, and CTV, now you can start charging the online platforms like Twitter and Facebook to, who share your news information, a certain premium for how much they share the information that comes from you, which is like charging the paper boy who delivers your newspaper to deliver your newspapers for you, as opposed to paying him. What I think is that, hey, you know what? You're getting a huge boost from social media, any news network, anybody is, to promote their product, to promote their news stories or widgets or whatever it is they're selling. But this new bill, C-18, will actually allow Global News and CBC and CTV to charge Facebook and Twitter for allowing their stories on their platforms. So I think that Twitter might just do a Canadian blackout. I'm not sure if that's a possibility. I'm not sure if they can black out by region, but they might just say, we're not doing this. So we won't allow any of these links on our platform, or will just not exist in Canada. I'm not sure what Facebook is going to do, or YouTube or Google or any of the other ones, but I can imagine that Elon won't take this lying down.
No, he won't, and that'll certainly hurt the opposition's people with regard to freedom and liberty. That'll hurt them. It'll backfire on them in a sense that they're hindering their ability to send their propaganda out, because they try to get a lot of into this country, and it doesn't seem to be working very well. With regard to public broadcasting in America, we do have public broadcasting networks who are controlled by the government, and I'm happy to report tonight that I read today that a number of states are now defunding them, getting rid of them. Why? Because as you see, look at, even if the Canadian broadcasting companies are 70% funded, they're 100% with a with something around their neck, choking them to say this is what you're going to say. I mean, so who are they kidding, Shadow? Who are they
Well,
really kidding?
do you know the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is incredibly woke, incredibly left leaning, to the point of Marxism? And I believe that wokeism is the new Marxism. And if you haven't seen LT, a new video that's come out from a lecture given in France or Germany about a month ago by Dr. James Lindsay, I suggest you have a look at that. And for all you folks watching this right now, I played it on my show last night. It's 28 minutes of brilliance. He explains exactly what we're facing right now. But um, what is interesting right now that is going on in our country in the CBC? They're funded by the federal government to the tune of 1.4 billion dollars per year. Aside from the fact that they're allowed to swim in the same advertising pool as all of the other media, whether it's independent media like myself or whether it's the other left-wing corporate media like CTV and Global. So they're taking a chunk of money out of the private ad revenue lake, and they're also getting funding. Now, I say, if you are worth your weight and you are providing people a solid organization that's providing good, solid coverage of daily news or whatever it is you do, you should be able to exist on your own merit through advertising revenues or through contributions from viewers like PBS does. If you need government funding to sustain yourself, then maybe you should not be allowed to be on the air. And I can tell you that the ratings of the CBC are abysmal. Nobody watches them.
Well, speaking of them and PBS and the journalists, so-called journalists here, I know some of them are viewing. I know some of them are watching. All right.
Yeah.
So I like to look in the camera and tell them this. Those of you who are involved in government-funded broadcasting, you got to know. You've got to know that we, the people, know you're controlled in some way, shape, and form. But what's really bothers me is that you're living in free countries, whether it be Canada, the United States, or any country where freedom and liberty exists, and you are damaging your country. You are hurting your fellow citizens. And not only that, if you think, now hear me, if you think the communists, and this is all communist inspired as far as I'm concerned, are going to give you a free pass after they take control, whether it be your government, your country, and I'm talking about the United States of America, as well as Canada and other free countries, if you think they're going to give you a pass, no, you will be a slave. You will be a slave like those individuals are slaves in China, in communist China, and other countries where communism exists. So, Shadow, this is my message to them. They need to wake up and they need to understand that they have become pawns and puppets of government leaders who care little about them, meaning the broadcasters and journalists and anybody else who supports freedom and liberty, and will actually use them and do anything necessary for their own political survival.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Not so much, maybe pawns of government officials, bureaucrats, even elected politicians. But who are those politicians and bureaucrats controlled by? We have had a scandal raging up here in Canada for the last couple of months, and it should have been going on for the last 15 years. Well, actually, it shouldn't have been going on that long. It should have been nipped in the bud 15 years ago or so. When CSIS, that is our government spy agency here in Canada, I suppose it's the same as the FBI in the United States, started first uncovering stories of Chinese and Russian back in 2007, 2008, and Iranian interference in our government at every level, whether it's municipal, whether it's provincial, or whether it's federal. And for some reason, and I still can't figure out why, because back then the news wasn't so slanted one way or the other. And you had newspapers like the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail, which are also national newspapers, actually reporting the news. And they reported that there was Chinese, Russian, and Iranian interference going on at all political levels in this country, and nobody raised an eyebrow. And I'm thinking either they didn't read this or they don't care. And so here we are 15 years later, and this story is now a huge issue in Canada. We have Chinese communist bureaucrats in Canada influencing elections. We have proof of that from the 2021 election in at least 11 ridings across the country, which definitely could have tipped the election one way or the other in favor of the Conservatives or the Liberal Party, which is Justin Trudeau's party. And there could be more. We've also had stories about Chinese officials bullying Canadian citizens, actually, Canadian citizens who immigrated from China years ago and their families back home in China, including an MP, a conservative MP called Michael Chong. And the Liberals knew about this 2 years ago and did nothing about it, not until it became public in these past couple of weeks. And finally, they expelled that Chinese diplomat who was behind this, and I'm sure there's more of them, 2 days ago after serious public pressure from, believe it or not, the left-wing corporate media, but mostly Canadians. I have been seeing stories, LT, every single day because Trudeau, he's jumping around the country right now making ridiculous funding announcements. I think they just gave Volkswagen $13 billion to build an electric car plant in London, Ontario. So he's been jumping around the country making these ridiculous funding announcements, and everywhere he goes, there is a large group of people forming, and it seems as though the group becomes larger in each stop he makes of people yelling, F Trudeau, F Trudeau. It's not yelling. It's not, sorry, I was wrong to say yelling. They are chanting it. This is becoming a mantra from coast to coast to coast in this country. F Trudeau. There are flags. I'm sure you've seen them.
Well, yeah, it's similar to what's happening here in the United States regarding Biden, right?
Yeah.
The same thing. Here we have the laptop from hell. We're still trying to figure out who in the FBI has it, right? We had this news conference yesterday by the Republicans. Apparently, they've now got the money trail leading from some foreign governments, and China was mentioned, going into 6 or 7 bank accounts of the Biden crime family. And as you said, it took a few years for this to surface in your country. Same thing with us. You got Joe Biden, the vice president of the United States. The question I have is, I'd like to know how much Obama knew, if he knew anything. I mean, your own vice president, you don't know what's going on. But it's becoming. Here's what's happening. I like to look at the light beginning to shine now at the end of the tunnel on all this darkness. I always believe that timing is everything. And I've said all along that, I believe God's in control of a lot of events going on around the world. And the timing is now perfect. The elections are coming up in the United States. Elections are coming up in Canada. Probably elections are coming up in other countries. But more importantly than not, Shadow, what we didn't see years ago and what we didn't have was the internet. We didn't have live streaming. This is broadcasting today, what you do and what I do and others like us do. This is the broadcasting of the 21st century. And by all means, people are tuning into us more so than they are in the mainstream media. You're back.
I'm back.
Okay. Well, yeah, I tell you, I had some problems earlier. I just said to myself, oh no, here we go. Good, we're back. So if you disappear again, we'll get you back.
That's right.
So would you say today, in the 21st century, what we're doing now is true broadcasting, live broadcasting with facts, not fiction or propaganda?
Well, what I say about live streaming is that that people have to use their power of discernment, right? So folks like you and I, when we do a show like this one, we try to stay as close to actual fact as we possibly can. That means we verify these stories. We do not want to go on our shows and spread misinformation, as the term has been coined and repeatedly hammered through our brains for the last couple of years, or lies, as I used to call them, and I still do. But there are some independent broadcasters out there with large followings that don't seem to care too much about the truth, and they are spewing nothing but nonsense. So the people, and that goes both sides, of the fence, whether it's extreme left or extreme right, whatever it happens to be. So the people who decide to watch us need to use their own powers of discernment. They need to be able to look at us, and they need to be able to trust us, just like the old days of the news, right? I mean, Walter Cronkite was a trusted news voice in the United States of America.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't have been in that position had he not looked and sounded trustworthy, right? So, and there was a lot of integrity behind the broadcasters back in those days. Project or Operation Mockingbird was not as widespread back in those days, I don't think, as it is today. So, it's like any sort of broadcast media, whether it's independent, online, or on cable, wherever you find it. You have to be able to trust the person who is behind the news. So, um, I think the advantage we have, LT, is that we're independent.
Yes.
We don't have anybody telling us what we can and can't say. And this has been the issue with Tucker Carlson, and the reason that he left Fox News. He's done a couple of videos since then. And his last one, as far as I'm concerned, was the most powerful, where he said that there are corporate executives who will tell you what you can say and tell you what you can't say. I spent 37 years in media, and I can absolutely guarantee that that is a fact. I have been told by broadcast executives that if I'm to say something, I will be released immediately following what I have to say. And then they guide you in a way that you are forced to say what they want you to say, or you will be let go. So in this situation that you and I are both in right now, where we're funded only by the people who watch us through donations and maybe a couple of sponsorships if we've got them, they can trust us to be able to say, actually report on the truth. And if we make a mistake, they can trust us to admit that we've made a mistake and correct it either that same show or the very next night. So I believe that's where we have the upper hand. There is no corporate giant controlling anything that we say or do, unless we happen to be on a censorship platform like YouTube or Facebook.
Yeah. Well, what's that good book say? The truth will set you free. Hey, Shadow, comment on this one, because I believe you have the same problems in Canada that we have here. This is a headline today. And folks, it's embarrassing for my American citizens. I'm not purposely embarrassing our country, but it's going to get the message across. On Tuesday, we had hundreds of municipal races across the country, particularly here in New Jersey. Headline today: many of Tuesday's municipal races were decided by less than 1/4 of the electorate. Less than 1/4 of the electorate. The problem we have, folks, in this country, and I'll ask my good friend here to weigh in on it regarding Canada. People want change. They want to make a significant impact on changing government so that it'll look towards issues that concern the people. And yet, they're not going to vote. They're not coming out to vote. So how do you expect less than 1/4 of the electorate? I said on your show Tuesday night that more people are concerned about who's going to win the latest major league sports event than who's going to win the war for freedom and liberty. Shadow.
Yeah. Well, it's voter apathy. I don't know exactly why it exists. It's existed for a very long time. You've got, and I believe, if you look at the three levels that you're allowed to vote on, at least in this country, you're voting on municipal. So that's for mayor, reeve, city councils. And then you're voting provincially, which is for a premier, I guess in the United States case would be a governor of a state. And then, of course, federally. So in Canada, what you get for federal elections in terms of voter turnout is in the area of 70%. That's how many people turned out for the last federal election a couple of years ago. Provincially, depending on, I think it depends a lot too on who people see as candidates, who they want as opposed to who they don't want. And they like watching the knockdown, drag out battles that happen in the media. We've got a huge election coming up here in one of our most powerful provinces, and that is Alberta. That's going to be at the end of the month. And I fear that the left wing, the extremist left wing Marxist party may regain power there. It scares the hell out of me, LT. But, we had municipal elections all across our country last year, and we saw voter turnouts as low as 25 and 30%. This, I believe, is where the most damage is being done. What you talked about earlier in the show in your opening monologue was Mother's Day. They're trying to erase Mother's Day at the school level. So we vote for school trustees just like you do in the United States. And We have independent schools within school divisions now trying to cancel Mother and Father's Day. I know of 3 that have happened in our country in the last week where they're saying, we're not going to allow Mother's Day. And then the parents start yelling and screaming and making phone calls and sending emails or even showing up at the schools. And those schools, independent, again, of the school division, they make up their own decision on this, which blows my mind because it's such a highly controversial one that a principal feels that he or she can make a decision like this. They're reversing these decisions. So it's happened 3 times, one in Winnipeg, one in Toronto, one in Montreal, where a elementary school, a public school has tried to cancel Mother's Day and they have been turned away. So I think people are starting to get the message because these school trustees are elected on a local level, and the local level is where we need to be the most vigilant. What happens with the left, the extremists, the Marxists, is municipal politics are their training ground. And if they do well in municipal politics for a couple of years, then they move them up to the provincial level or the federal level. On the right side of the coin, there is none of that. We don't have that farm team kind of organization on our side because we're all independent thinkers. Those people on the other side are all part of this monolith. At least they like to think so. And so they all walk in lockstep and they all follow the same doctrine. That's what we're up against. So what we need to do is, actually speak to the candidates in municipal elections and say, do you believe in wokeism? Do you believe in Marxism? Do you believe in the Great Reset? Do you believe that communism is better than our current system, which is capitalism, which has gotten us to where we are today? And if you don't ask these questions and you feel you're not getting an honest answer, then maybe you should not vote for that candidate. And if you don't ask those questions, then you are part of the problem, I would say.
Well, I'm happy to report that here in the States, moms, if you will, actually organized across the country. And a lot of them tossed these school board members out. So they're gone. Wokeism is gone. Governor DeSantis in Florida actually has taken the bull by the horns and is outlawed wokeism. In fact, last week he signed a bill that will prohibit anyone who's Chinese and not a citizen of the United States cannot buy land in his state. So we see a very good domino effect, like what you said, from the ground up, not from the top down, but from the ground up on a local level. I'm also happy to report that a number of local elections, you got mayors and city councils and commissions have been flipped. One city totally from Democrat to Republican. So we're doing a lot of good, a lot of progress is being made. But my concern here in America is, as you said earlier about broadcasters, our Republican Party has a problem. They have to stop fighting with each other. We have what's called Reagan's 11th commandment. Thou shall not speak evil or attack another Republican during a primary. And so we've got a little bit of an uphill battle convincing these people running for office to keep their mouth shut when it comes to a fellow Republican, open it up with regard to the real opposition, which are those who support wokeism and, of course, a communist influence. So
how split is the Republican Party down there, LT? Is it bad?
Pardon me?
How split is the Republican Party? Is it bad or is it healable?
Well, no, it's getting better. I've got to tell you, I'm impressed with what's going on because a few things. It was very bad. All right. On a federal level, there is a big split. All right. Of course, you have the Trump factor, and then you have the establishment, and then you have everybody in the middle. But I see more Republicans now coming to the center. They're exhausted, Shadow. They're exhausted over the drama. They're exhausted over the name calling. And I'm not just saying Trump is causing all of this, but he is to a certain degree. And there comes a time when you just get exhausted. And the name that constantly comes up, and I've said this over and over again, when I go around the country and I meet with Republicans, I ask them this question. If you could vote for anyone on this planet to become president of the United States, who would you vote for? And the name Ronald Reagan constantly comes up, constantly, because it was during his time we prospered, that he was very diplomatic when it came to working with Tip O'Neill, who was in Speaker of the House, on and on and on. So they don't forget those years. But moving forward, DeSantis seems to be the guy that may be able to take the lead if in fact there's a primary and he wins it. But we, on a local level, yeah, everybody's getting together. Chairmen, chairwomen are uniting the party. But we've got a problem facing elections on a federal level for one factor that we did not expect, and I didn't expect. All along for a year and a half, I've been sharing with the American people and the Republican Party, we better keep our eyes open, because if we know that Joe Biden's not gonna run, he's going to get pushed out. But if the Democrat Party if they find a Democrat moderate conservative, we as Republicans are going to have a problem. It might be good for the country, but as speaking from party perspective, we got a problem. Well, out of nowhere, guess who shows up? Robert Kennedy Jr. Robert Kennedy Jr. shows up. And here we go again. We're back. I tell you, I had problems with this. So
Hi. I'm back.
Yeah, he's back. So who shows up? Robert Kennedy Jr. And most of the agenda of the Republican Party, he supports. Not all of it, but I think most of it. And so when he gets up before a crowd and says, I'm going to restore the party of FDR, of JFK, of Robert Kennedy Sr., of Martin Luther King, well, Republicans and independents are now listening and saying, look, if the Republicans can't get their act together, this may be the guy. Why, Shadow? They want the country united. They want the country to prosper.
Do you think that the Democrats would allow, and this is where it comes to controlling candidates and controlling elections, and I'm not sure, LTU and I have never talked about this one, but I believe that most elections are controlled. Most elections are rigged and fixed before we ever see the results of them. And do you think the Democrat Party would ever allow RFK Jr. to get that nomination?
No. In fact, well, here, let me say this to you. I don't believe that they will support him going into any primaries. But if, in fact, he's the only game in town, well, you might see them sit down and maybe negotiate something with him as to who could be vice president, et cetera. But I don't think he's a negotiable guy. They had that problem in the 60s with JFK. They really didn't want to support him when he was running for office. He was too conservative back then for the Democrats. But, his father, Joe, had a lot of wheeling and dealing in power. But saying that, they may not have a choice. It's either going to be a Democrat, and if it's RFK, it'll be him. They want anybody but a Republican in there, anybody but a conservative. But you're right. Look, these elections are controlled, again, from the bottom up. But if the people, and I try to get this across to people, you can't surrender, because we far outnumber any amount of money they could throw into an election. We really do. But they want to discourage us. They want to bully us. They want to intimidate us. They send tons of misinformation. And what do we do? Shadow, what does our side do when they get misinformation?
We all apologize, because they're always on the attack and we're on the defensive all the time. And the second you apologize to the mob, game over. You're just shark bait.
Yeah.
That's
and
it.
What else? And what else do? They take the information that you got and you share it. You say, look, so we've got to delete. And as you say, no more apologies. I'll tell you what, in the United States here, and I see it happening in your country, we're on the offensive now. When I see 6,000 letters in 6 days, 1,000 letters a day, and Lord knows where that's going, that shows me that the Canadian Parliament, Trudeau, and that old gang up there that's trying to take your freedom and liberty away, they have a problem. And that problem is the people in Canada, because the people in Canada are now well aware of what's going on, and they're on the offensive. Well,
I hope you're right. I mean, over the weekend, the Liberal Party of Canada, again, that's Trudeau's party, they had their yearly convention, and they voted on a number of resolutions which appear on the Liberal Party website. Now, we know it was discussed, mandatory vaccines, and it still appears on their website, even though they're denying that is the case, that they don't want to bring this in. Basically, we know that from a phone call that was made by an independent journalist here in Canada to one of the Liberal MPs in British Columbia, who said it was confirmed that it definitely was discussed, mandatory vaccination of Canadians. And it appears on the Liberal website, even though the party is denying and say, we only discussed it. Well, then why is it on your website? Because we discussed it. Well, look, if you if you haven't resolved for this, then it should not be appearing anywhere on your website. It has not been agreed upon by the party that this is what you want to do. It should be left off the website until such time as you agree with that. And what astounds me about this is the fact that only the independent media have been covering this. It has not been talked about by the left-wing corporate media, as I call them up here. And it has not been discussed by the Conservative Party of Canada. But, I guess they're too busy hammering home the Chinese interference, the Chinese election interference, and the Chinese bullying that's been going on in the House of Commons the last couple of days. Maybe they haven't had time to hammer on these mandatory vaccines. But, and this will astound you, the polling in Canada, even though it's not as strong, the results are not as strong in favor as it was 2 years ago, still shows that the majority of Canadians believe that everything the government did to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 in the last 3 years was necessary. Now, again, that number has come down from something like 78% to barely 50%, but still the majority of Canadians believe that. So, you're right. We are getting to a lot of people, LT. We are making people aware, at least, of another side to this story, and some of them are waking up, but we still do have a long way to go.
Well, let's talk about this for a minute. Let's say they believe it, like you say, because we had that problem here. When we shifted our narrative, if you will, from being what they labeled us as anti-vax, we said, look, we're not anti-vaccine. We're pro individual rights, pro make your own choice. Okay, so here's what I'm a little puzzled over: what we're seeing or not seeing in Canada. We have protesters on the left and on the right. They're out there. Well, here they're out here burning buildings down. The left is taking over cities, and hopefully that'll be taken care of soon. But my point is this: is there anybody in your country on the left that has protested? Has any rallies? I mean, it seems like all the protesting, rightfully so, is from people who are for freedom and liberty. I'm trying to figure out all these people that are not out there on the left, or they're just saying, hey, do whatever you want to us. We're happy.
Well, I will tell you that, of course, you're obviously fully aware of the Freedom Convoy and how people were treated. Some people were treated. We've just had a new charge against a trucker. Four new charges against a trucker that stem back to 18 months ago. Harold Jonker, sorry, is his name. And he has been charged with 4 counts, and I think a couple of them were mischief and incitement to commit mischief or whatever. And this is amazing to me that they're still actually trying to milk that cow. But we had a federal workers' strike. Federal government workers were on strike for a period of about 2 weeks, 150,000 of them. And they were blocking critical infrastructure all over our capital city of Ottawa and in places like Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. And nobody said anything about it. Nobody said that they were a problem, and they were a problem because they were blocking critical infrastructure. They were blocking main thoroughfares so that emergency vehicles couldn't get through. Now, during the Freedom Convoy, that never happened. There was always open lanes for emergency vehicles and any other vehicles to get through. Yes, it would have taken them longer to get through certain areas, but there were always lanes open. Not during this federal workers' strike. Now, the thing about this is all of these federal workers are unionized. And the government, if they decided to say, I'm sorry, but you people all need to be arrested, would have been vilified by 3 or 4 huge federal worker unions, including one called CUPE, which is absolutely massive across this country. So they were allowed to go ahead and do whatever it was they wanted to do before this strike was settled. And yes, they did wind up getting 13% pay raises over the next 4 years. And they also each got $2,500 signing bonuses for the new contract. Now, having said that, there is a municipal government in Canada, in Calgary, Alberta, that has passed a law, a municipal bylaw that says you cannot protest certain things, right? So if you want to protest against pornography appearing in children's books in public libraries and public schools, I'm sorry, but you cannot do so within 200 meters of the entrance to the building. But if you're supporting defunding the police, BLM, whatever else, then absolutely go ahead. We don't care. It's awesome. So they're trying to make certain kinds of protests illegal in this country. Calgary has done that, which is against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So naturally, we have to go to court and fight this, which could take up to 2 years to get Calgary to go ahead and reverse this. One of the problems that we have in this country is the fact that a government, whether it's municipal, federal, or provincial, can go ahead and make an unconstitutional law, and then somebody has to step up and fight it, and we don't get the resolution for 2 years or longer. I don't think it works that way in the United States. I don't believe that it should work that way here either. If a government at any level tries to make an unconstitutional law, it should be struck down immediately. It should be sent to court immediately, and that is not the case here. And that I'm
back.
sorry about that.
No, that's from our
That's
side.
something we've been having problems with our court cases for the past couple of years. Anything COVID related, by the way, I've got something interesting I want to break here on your show tonight, LT. I got an email today from a trusted source of mine who said that in May 2020, it seems that Richard Wagner, who is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, went into a partnership with David Lametti, who is the Attorney General and the Minister of Justice of our country, to form a committee called the Action Committee on Court Operations in Response to COVID-19. The mandate that one of the mandates this committee put forward required the committee adapt public health principles and guidelines identified by first ministers and health authorities. And this means they had to apply judicial notice in every COVID-related court case in every province of our country, meaning that judicial notice is just assuming that whatever the government did to mitigate the spread of this virus was just like the grass is green and the ocean is wet. In other words, it's just a fact of life.
You shared with me it took 18 months for them to go after this trucker.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we did something 18 months later too, and I'll share with you what we did. We have been given information, and I actually shared with this, I think, last week with an audience, that the U.S. government may have, and I'm going to underscore the word may have, been involved in some sort of surveillance of Canadians and U.S. citizens during that truckers' convoy. Now, the problem may be if the U.S. government was involved, if U.S. government assets were involved, whether it be law enforcement or military, well, people on this side of the border are going to have a problem, because what we have is what we call intel oversight laws. And so we thought that information should go to our Homeland Security people in Congress, our House Foreign Affairs Committee, and we also sent that information to a group called Judicial Watch, very, very good organization, asking them to obtain any information regarding this issue under the Freedom of Information Act. The interesting part of the information that we have, one of the, let's say, assets we have identifiers. We actually are able to identify something. So now, the fact of the matter is, Shadow, is that if in fact the American government was involved in any type of surveillance, and look, we specifically laid out under the Freedom of Information Act, we want to know if there was surveillance of cell phone conversations, computer chat rooms, on and on and on, even leading up to the Freedom Convoy. Mm-hmm. Why? Because, and I underscored this, because I want to make sure we are always within the framework of our laws here, we're concerned about the national security of the United States of America. Therefore, if the national security in Canada is being corrupted and disrupted, and freedom is being taken away, then in our view, our national security then is in jeopardy. Because what's happening here is, if they're working in concert with each other with regard to hindering our ability to communicate, our ability to vote, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, etc., then we need to come together in a peaceful, lawful manner. And the way we do that here is we're letting our congressional representatives know. So they may have had 18 months to do what they did with this truck driver. Well, not only did we do something in 18 months, but we got a lot more coming. And every bit of information we get, our intention is this, as I said over and over again, we can't get involved in legislation regarding your policies, but we can educate our lawmakers. And that's what's important. And that's why I tell the people of Canada and the United States, you know what? Don't be discouraged, folks. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, a lot. But Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say. It got burned down in a day, by bad people, but it wasn't built in a day. And you're one of the builders, Shadow. And all these people watching are all builders. You're building a country that's going to be prosperous and freedom will reign.
We are trying the best we absolutely can to wake people up and get them involved in the process. Because once we get to that fever pitch, to that threshold where people go, wait a minute, this is wrong. When they start hearing things like the Canadian military was surveilling people in the first 12 months of this pandemic, like they surveilled the citizens of Afghanistan when they were there a few years ago. They actually used those tactics on Canadian people. They actually monitored your whereabouts during the first year of this pandemic using your cell phone. They were pinging you. They knew where you were. Why? They wanted to know what was popular, what wasn't popular, what people were doing, what people weren't doing. The Canadian military did that to its own people. It was reported, it's illegal, and still we have seen no action. So what we need to do, as you say, is build a public groundswell, LT, and make some noise. Only then will the authorities respond in a responsible and lawful way, in my opinion.
Well, I'm happy to report that the Canadian people have made so much noise that 2 weeks ago, One America News asked me to come on to talk about Canada and Trudeau. And they're going to have me on again. And I'm hoping that we get to Newsmax and Fox and other stations to wake the people up. The thing we're fighting here is we're so involved with this fiasco in Ukraine. Again, all of the corruption here, I mean, it just doesn't stop. But I'm saying that because, again, the Canadian people need to understand that although you may not be hearing very much from the U.S. end of it, believe me, we're doing the best we could, and we're not going to keep our eyes off the northern border. I'll tell you, Shadow, I'm more concerned about the northern border than the southern border. At least we can see what's going on the southern border. Yeah. We can't see what's going on in Canada other than the information we're getting from the Canadian people. So I've said this all along. Our country has always said, if you see something, say something. We see something north of our border, and now we're saying something.
Absolutely. I fully agree. LT, I've got to get going for my show pretty soon. I've got a great guest on tonight. He's the author of a book called What the Hell is Going On? His name is Donald Lee.
Give out your Facebook page. Folks, he's going to give his Facebook page. Push like, follow, and get this guy over 60,000.
Okay, so it's The Shadow Davis Show on Facebook. On Rumble, it's rumble.com/Shadow Davis, and it's at Shadow Davis on Twitter. This guy tonight is written a book, like I say, it's called What the Hell is Going On? It's all about recognizing patterns and what's been happening in the world and how we can recognize when the next one is coming. It's that simple, and I think that it's going to help people to understand, we got another one coming. If they are hinting that there's going to be another pandemic and this one's going to be worse in the next 18 to 24 months, then you can bet there will be. They're floating that trial balloon. Before I go, though, LT, I wanted to ask you quickly, what were your thoughts on Trump's appearance in the CNN town hall last night?
I said to my wife, I hope he doesn't ask that question. Really, I said, I hope that question never comes up.
I want to know.
Well, I got to tell you, I was disappointed on two perspectives. The interviewer, she wasn't good at all. I mean, she was just there to challenge him on everything. But secondly, I would have loved for him to say, hey, look, you know what? Let the 2020 election go. It's an anchor holding us down. Whatever happened then let's move forward. Let's talk about policy. Let's talk about making America great again. He didn't do that. And I was somewhat disappointed in that. But we're going to move forward, are we not?
Oh, yeah. I was noticing on Twitter today, they were saying a lot of people Trump got a whole new audience now because of what happened on CNN last night. And even some of the CNN people were going, yeah, he's right. I mean, this woman, I forget her name, the interviewer.
Yeah,
but
Caitlin Collins, something like that.
Caitlin Collins, right. She got at least 3 things completely and totally wrong. Yeah. And I'm not talking about just factual information. I'm talking about U.S. law.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, she was not she was not there to interview him. She was there to try to embarrass him, but he actually embarrassed her. But on a policy, that's why people said they're kind of exhausted. Let's move on, but let's see what happens, But there's a God above. Hopefully, I believe he's in control, and let's hope that he continues to use guys like you and others to, let freedom ring. It has
Exactly.
been an honor. It's a pleasure to know. If anything out of all this came, one of the great things was getting to know you. I really give you a lot of credit for what you're doing in your country, and we'll do this again together sometime.
My friend, it is an honor to appear on your show, and I think we should probably do this more often. The more we can cooperate, like I was talking about earlier, the independent media, the more we can get ourselves together and get the messages out to each other's countries and each other's audiences, the bigger the movement is going to become. So thank you for having me. I
Well,
appreciate
God
it.
bless you, and I salute you, my friend, and thanks again. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Well, folks, you know what? There are no shortage of heroes in Canada. No shortage of heroes in the free world. You just saw one right on the air. I'll tell you what, this guy, Shadow Davis, has impressed me from day one. And I know there are other broadcasters in Canada who are doing work just like him. Folks, especially in Canada, and those of you in the United States watching, stay together, pray together, work together. You're going to win this war. Believe me, it's going to take time. There are going to be times of discouragement. Look, Wednesday nights, I'm keeping a promise to God. I have those radio messages, and they're faith based. They're based on faith and prayer and the power of God. We could put all this together, folks, all of this together. And at the end of the day, believe me, they lose and we win. Please support Shadow, support those broadcasters up there in Canada who are very close to the front lines there. The best way you can support us at this point, and I mean this, is pray for us, okay? Pray that God will meet our needs. He made the promise, right? He says, I will supply all your needs. That's all I want from you. Continue sending letters, and we're going to do everything we could on this side of the border to make that border secure for all of us. Well, that's it, folks. I want to thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being on the air here tonight. We'll see you next Thursday. And to all the mothers out there, happy Mother's Day. Mother's Day ain't going nowhere. They're always going to cancel anything on us. Why? Because we the people are going to let freedom ring. God bless you all. Thank you for joining me. We'll see you next week. And I'm Lieutenant Stephen Rogers.